Hey guys, today we're going to be going over the first 3 bosses in Terraria that are mandatory for you to defeat. Up first we have Eye of Cthulhu, we have the Devourer, and then finally we have Skeletron. These are 3 crucial bosses that you're gonna have to go through in order to really progress in the game, at least assuming you're not trying to speedrun. So before we get into talking about each individual boss, let's talk about the items I think you should bring to each one no matter which boss you're fighting. First up, I recommend that you bring some kind of consumables. Usually I recommend Iron Skin Potion here, as Iron Skin gives an extra 8 armor. I also recommend you bring Regeneration Potions, and I also recommend you bring Health Potions. Those are your consumables on that side. Aside from that, I also recommend that for the strategy and building stage, that you bring yourself at least 1,000 platforms, bring some torches, bring usually 10 to 25 campfires. And aside from that, if you are using magic by chance, which usually you aren't by this stage, but if you happen to be using it, bring yourself some mana potions as well. Armor and weapon wise, I do always recommend armor. You just wear whatever you can find that is the best option. Unless you are using something that needs a specific armor set, such as the space gun or something like that. Otherwise, you're going to want to bring just anything that can do piercing damage. Those are going to be your standard best and most consistent weapons. So this would usually be a bow with some holy arrows or some unholy arrows in order to help you do piercing damage and hit multiple targets per shot. Otherwise, if you're still early, especially with like the Eye of Cthulhu, I know those may not be an option for you yet, so you can always bring fire arrows to those. If you still don't want to use a bow for whatever reason, you can of course use melee weapons for all these bosses. I just personally do not recommend it, as I think it's significantly harder. Or you can bring a yo-yo, that also works, whatever tickles your fancy, but at the end of the day, my recommendation is some kind of piercing weapon if you can get your hands on one. Alrighty, so Eye of Cthulhu. Eye of Cthulhu, we're going to take our 1,000 platforms that we brought, and we're going to go ahead and just lay out a nice, tall, long platform above usually your house if you have one or whatever. But we're going to try to lay this out in both directions, or we can lay it out in one direction if you happen to already know where Skeletron is at. The reason I usually say both directions is because if you are playing with a friend and one of your players die, then they are able to respawn back at your base, hopefully, and then get right back into the fight, no matter which direction they're in. Aside from that, you're going to place down your platforms. You're going to place some campfires periodically throughout that. The way to tell when you need to place another campfire is you're going to look for the little buff in the top left after you place your first one. And as soon as that disappears, you're going to go ahead and place your second. Of course, you're going to want a grapple hook for all of these bosses as well. I didn't mention that earlier, but just going forward, remember, grapple hooks are very important. They make a huge difference when dealing with these early games bosses and how difficult they can be. Otherwise, if you can get some kind of mobility, like Hermes boots or a speed potion, anything like that, go ahead and use it. It's going to make your life easier here. So how do we spawn the Eye of Cthulhu? Well, it's not that complicated. You just need 6 lenses. You can find those from the little eyes that are floating around. You want the regulars, not the blacks. And then you can go ahead and head to a demon altar. You can either find those in your corruption or crimson, depending on what you have for your world. And otherwise, you can then dig down directly below your spawn point, and there tends to be a high chance you're going to find one. Although that method is not guaranteed, it is an option if you're struggling to get to the ones in the crimson or the corruption. Now, once you get there, you're going to act as if it was a crafting table and just craft yourself the Eye of Cthulhu thing, and you'll be able to spawn him. Not very complicated. You do want to spawn him as soon as it gets late enough at night for him to spawn. I don't remember the exact time, but I'm pretty sure you can just basically spam this as it's getting dark, and as soon as it lets it spawn in, that'll give you the maximum amount of time to defeat him, because once the sun rises, this boss will despawn, and you will no longer be able to fight him, and you will lose all your progression on that fight. Okay, so how do we actually fight him? Now that we've done the setup, we've got the spawning items, we got everything we need, our potions, our arrows, our bow, or whatever weapons we're using. What do we actually do? Well, let's talk about his 2 mechanics, and then we'll go from there. So first up, Eye of Cthulhu is very easy, and his first mechanic is basically just a little float towards you thing. He kind of just slowly floats towards you. If he does touch you, you're going to take some damage. And yeah, that's pretty much it. His second mechanic is he's going to spawn little eyeballs that will fly around. I always recommend you target these down first, as they are more things to dodge and have to deal with. They also move faster than him, at least in the beginning. So being able to outrun this makes a huge difference. So I always recommend you just keep constantly pumping arrows at him, and whenever you see a little eyeball, if it gets too close, pull out a melee weapon. Otherwise, just keep ranging all the little tiny eyeballs down as much as you can until you get to phase 2. Now, once you're in phase 2, the only thing that's going to change here is the eye is going to turn into a mouth, and the mouth is going to try to eat you. The mouth is going to move a little bit faster and do these little mini dashes. And when he does those, they're going to be significantly harder to dodge if you don't have some kind of move speed. This is where having Hermes boots, having a speed potion, again, really, really helps out. Either of those two items can completely change your day when dealing with this guy. So having those, you're going to keep pumping arrows into him as much as you possibly can. If you can't outrun him or you run out of space, your next best option is to either jump over him if you can, otherwise drop down below the platform and grappling hook around him. That's going to take some practice to do, although it is the safer method once you are good at it. So if you are struggling, just practice that method in order to dodge him more, or just create a larger platform if you're just running out of platform space. But otherwise, that's the Eye of Cthulhu. Hopefully you'll be able to kill him. He shouldn't be too difficult. He's definitely the easiest boss in the game. Alrighty, up next is the Eater of Worlds, which is the Corruption boss. So if you do have the Crimson boss, I'm going to cover a little bit about him here in just a little bit, but generally speaking, their strategies are very similar. So we're going to talk about the Devourer first, and then we will mention a couple things about the other guy here in just a second. So the Devourer is the Corruption boss. You're going to head over to the Corruption, you're going to find one of those deep wells, and you're going to jump down it. Hopefully you don't kill yourself, so use a grappling hook. Otherwise, you're going to try to work your way down there, and you should find kind of a larger area, hopefully with some of these purple orbs floating nearby on your screen. Now, what you want to do is you're going to go ahead and bring some bombs with you here. Do not forget to bring the bombs, guys. They're crucial to being able to beat this guy and even spawn him in. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those bombs, and you're going to try to dig down with the bombs by blowing up the tiles in order to blow up those little purple spheres. If you're doing Crimson, these will be red hearts, same concept. So once you get there, you're then going to go ahead and you're going to start blowing them up, but you're only going to blow up 2. Now, they do drop items. If you do want them, you're welcome to, keep them, use them, try them out, see if there's something you like. But again, generally here we want piercing weapons. I don't think the Corruption drops any piercing ones. I know the Crimson drops like a rain rod thing. That can be really useful. But aside from that, you're generally going to stick with whatever piercing weapon you have or anything like that. So how do we set up for this boss now that we've got 2 of those purple orbs dead? Because the third one is going to spawn them, and we want to be ready for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take some regular blocks, and we're going to wall off every outlet going down, left, or to the right. You usually want to keep the upper one open, even though it does carry a little bit of risk, because if you need to escape, that's your only route to get back to the surface. And if you're going to die, it's always better to die on the surface, so you don't have to try to jump down there and get your stuff depending on what difficulty you're on, or get your money, whatever. Either way, it's nice to have that channel to work your way up if you get pushed into a corner. So when you're setting up for this boss, you're going to set up platforms that go all the way from the bottom all the way to the top, with some space in between about as high as your character can jump. You don't have to be perfect with these, but you want to be as close as you can to it so that you can create the maximum distance between each one. Now, if you do have your grappling hook, they can even be further apart, but I always recommend aiming for jump height, because jump height will allow you to move much more comfortably and easily between each layer of platform. So what we're going to do is, now that we have that laid out, we're going to place some campfires down. That'll give you some health regeneration while you're fighting this boss once again. Also some torches so you can see what the hell's going on down there, because it is very dark. But aside from that, we're pretty much ready to go. If you guys have happened to have a goblin army attack you, and you want to just kill this boss in all of 10 seconds, all you need to do is take every single spike ball you got from that goblin army, and you're just going to litter the platforms with it. Just absolutely litter it everywhere. Throw every single one you got out just until they start despawning. Keep throwing them everywhere, because those do piercing damage when it passes through them. So when the worm is passing through these things, it can basically result in a near instant kill or a significantly easier boss fight at the very least. Alright, so now that we're set up and ready to go, how do we actually fight this guy? Quite frankly, he's really easy. All you're going to have to do is keep moving. You're going to want to jump constantly between the platforms. Do not fight him above ground on like an elevated surface that's not on ground level. If you do happen to choose to go that method, the boss will shoot range stuff at you that can essentially one-shot you, which is, of course, very bad. But otherwise, we're going to aim for his head when we're using our piercing weapons as much as possible. Of course, you can choose not to do this, but there are consequences. The way this boss works is his head does more damage than every other part of his body dramatically. So 1 or 2 hits from the head can kill you, whereas it could take 10 or 20 even, depending on your armor, of the body hits to hit you in order to die. So that's why for this boss, we really want to focus on the head. Every time you do happen to split him in half or cut a body piece or you chop the head off, he's either going to shrink or be chopped into 2, and then he'll be 2 bosses you have to deal with 2 heads. So the idea here is that we keep the boss only having 1 head at all times. So if he does happen to split on accident, you want to make sure you target the smaller worm whenever it's an option. Again, the reason we're doing this is to try to limit the number of heads the boss currently has. Each individual head is more risk to you that you're going to die. Aside from that, this boss is very straightforward. He can use those platforms you built to move, so that's why we did spread them out earlier. But aside from that, he's really simple. You just keep piercing him. You do as much damage as you can. If you're struggling, wait for the goblin army to come, get the spike balls, throw them everywhere, and then he'll be much easier to deal with. Alrighty, now we are at the 3rd boss that we're going to talk about today, which is Skeletron. Skeletron is kind of special because without defeating him, you cannot enter the dungeon where a lot of the mid-tier early game items are. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say early game, when you defeat the final boss, pre-hard mode is what we would consider like mid-game, is when you enter hard mode. He's like a checkpoint. You technically don't have to do any of the bosses we've just talked about, but most people who are learning the game, you're going to need to beat each individual one in order to get good enough gear to be able to even handle the final boss to enter hard mode, which is the Wall of Flesh. We'll make another video about him if you guys like this. But anyways, going back to the topic before we get straight off too far, Skeletron. Skeletron, same method as the Eye of Cthulhu here. Very, very simple. We're going to take those 1,000 platforms. We're going to try to connect it all the way back to our original Eye of Cthulhu platform. The more platforms, the better. If you want to cover your whole world in them, I highly, highly encourage it. I know it's a big chore, but I guarantee you'll probably end up doing it anyways because it is so useful to have a highway above the ground where all you have to deal with is an occasional zombie or slime or something like that. When you're trying to cross the map constantly, it makes a huge difference. Otherwise, for Skeletron, we're also going to set up those campfires again, and we're going to do this boss the same way we did Eye of Cthulhu. If you need to spawn him and you somehow don't know, you're going to find the dungeon, which will either be located on the right or left of your map at the surface. When you do find it, there's going to be an old man standing in front of it at 7:30 p.m. in-game time, assuming you have an in-game watch. If you don't, you can just keep re-talking to him and opening the window until you see the curse option. You'll be able to choose that curse option, which will then turn him into Skeletron. Now, when he transforms, you need to book it immediately. As soon as you hit that button, you need to be ready to immediately already be running or grapple away, whatever, because this guy is going to spawn on the spot. They don't give you like 2 seconds to run. It is instantaneous. So as soon as he's out, what you want to do is create distance just like you did with the Eye of Cthulhu. Now he does move much faster, so this is where having speed potions or having Hermes boots really starts coming in handy again. Having that extra jump from a cloud in a bottle really comes in handy again. He's going to hurt you a lot more than the previous 2 bosses with every single hit too. Think of him as basically having the head for the Devourer with slightly less damage, but hits you way more often and is a lot harder to dodge. So how do we deal with this guy? Well, we're going to target his hands, and the reason we're doing that is because his head takes less damage for every hand that is still active. So the only way we can actually really kill the boss is to deal with his hands first. This is where piercing's going to come in and help a lot, as well as flame arrows, all that stuff, because he moves a lot more erratically. You're just going to kind of spam and lob arrows in his direction. Don't worry if he goes off screen. He's still there. He's still chasing you. You're just going to keep shooting those arrows. You're going to pump them into him as much as you can while creating distance, jumping up and down, dropping underneath the platform to grapple. This guy's going to be your first semi-challenger really going to have to deal with and play smart. Now, once you've gotten to the point where you've broken both of his hands, he'll go into his second phase. His second phase, all he really does is sit there and spin. He's going to try to chase you down, and if you're running in certain circumstances, he can still get on you, but he hits a lot harder in this phase. All you have to do is not get touched by the head, and you will beat this guy when you get to phase 2. Keep pumping arrows into him, keep using your laser gun, keep using whatever weapon you chose, and keep hitting that Skeletron's head. He will go down. He doesn't do anything else other than that little spin, and that's it. If you are fighting this guy on expert mode or any other harder difficulty, he's way different. So the only thing that translates here is the platform, except you really do need like the whole entire freaking map to be covered, depending on the size of your world, of course. If you have a large world or even an extra large if you're using mods, you may not need that. But that's aside from the point. As far as the normal mode Skeletron goes, pump arrows, keep moving, do your best to dodge, drop underneath the platform and grapple once in a while if you need to get around him and start going the other direction, whatever. The only thing you really don't want to do is get stuck on the ground. If you do get stuck on the ground, he's going to get right on top of you and you're basically done at that point. Now, if you do fail the attempt on Skeletron, he will not respawn until the following day. So that means you only get one attempt at him per in-game day. So just keep that in mind. It's perfectly fine. There's no like items you have to create or those little balls you have to destroy like for the Devourer or the hearts for the Crimson guy. He's very straightforward. You talk to him, you turn him into Skeletron, and then once he despawns, he's done for the day and he won't come back. After that, you'll hopefully have killed him and gained access to the dungeon. Now you really only have one major threat standing in front of you, and that's going to be the Wall of Flesh. We will be talking about him in another video, so if you guys want to see how to deal with the Wall of Flesh, please leave a comment down below letting us know what you guys want us to talk about. If there's other tips, other areas of Terraria you'd like us to talk about, do feel free to let us know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and I will see you next time.